So I'm just going to get going. This session is about best practices around filters. So, the filters in Cloudingo. Some of this might seem very ordinary for those of you who are experienced Cloudingo users, but we created this particular session because we regularly and consistently get the question, what are the best filters to use? So that's why we created this session. So let me just click through. Only have a few slides. I'm not a big slide person, but because we're using this different platform, we created a few slides. So our agenda today, we're going to look at just some of the basics about creating what, in my opinion, are the best filters to be using, particularly on an ongoing basis. And the caveat with that is these are not the only filters that you want to use, but these are the best filters that you will want to use sort of on an ongoing basis and to get through that sort of initial lift of cleaning your data and then to have it be running in the background to stay ahead of the problem. I'm also going to talk to you a little bit about some tweaks that I use to the matching algorithms in the filters that I think are really good, that give you a little bit more flexibility without compromising the reliability of the results. Okay? Then we'll just have some examples and some Q&A. Just a couple of little housekeeping things. I asked Olivia to add this to our presentation today because we're using GoToWebinar instead of Teams. And so those of you who've been with us in the past, we use Teams. GoToWebinar is great because we can accommodate more people, but it also has some compromises. And one of those things is that you can't share your cameras. So unfortunately, I cannot see you. Hopefully, you're all seeing me and Olivia, but I can't see you. And that's unfortunate for me because I like the idea of interactivity. The whole point of a users group is for you to be able to engage with us and talk to us rather than just sitting through a static presentation. I like it to be a little bit more dynamic and interactive. So to that end, you also cannot unmute yourself, but Olivia can unmute you. So if you have a question, if you just click the raise your hand button, Olivia can work with you and unmute you and you can talk to me. I would love that. I know that not everybody is comfortable with that. Not everybody is comfortable with just sending their voice across the internet in a general meeting. If you prefer, please feel free to use the chat window. Olivia's there, she's monitoring the chat and she will articulate those questions to me so that we can include them as part of our conversation here. So hopefully that won't be too cumbersome for you. Hopefully you'll feel connected and engaged in this conversation. That is my ultimate goal. If we don't get to all of your questions, we will follow up at the end offline, either through email or direct messaging to you. And there also is going to, of course, be a recording that Olivia will send out. The last thing I'll say is that I'm going to go through some, as I said, best practices. We're going to talk about filter configuration. We're going to talk about field usage. We're going to talk about algorithms. Don't worry about taking notes. Again, we're going to send out the recording. We also put together a really beautiful handout that we'll send out and you can just download. And it's sort of a tip sheet. So hopefully that will be a useful tool for you. All right.
Hey, Steve, just jumping in here. It seems like the chat might not be working for some people. So if you also submit a question to the questions tab, that is working and I'm monitoring that. So
yes, so hopefully you're seeing, I do know that I can see that some people have the questions window open. There should also be a chat thing. If that's not working, again, just try those things. Raise your hand if you're stuck and Olivia will help you out and we'll do the best we can. Apologies for some of these mechanical challenges. There's so many different platforms now between Zoom and Teams and GoToWebinar and WebEx that I don't know all of the intricacies of each platform. So again, apologies. All right, so I'm going to exit this and go to Cloudingo. So this is just my test Cloudingo account. So again, our topic today is best practices around filters. So let me start at the highest level and we'll sort of get into the nitty-gritty of some of this. In terms of best practices, the first thing that I always recommend to a new customer or to a customer that I'm working on one-on-one with through a services contract or something like that is that we want to start small and be very precise. So I always suggest and recommend, and if I'm setting the account up for my customers, we work with key fields and we set them to exact matches. Right? So small, exact matches, very tight, high reliability. Okay? The next step beyond that is that we'll gradually begin loosening those filters up. For those of you, I know most of you have at least some experience with Cloudingo, your Cloudingo customers. You know that there's all sorts of algorithms that we can use, different field combinations, different matching algorithms to build out your filters. Right? So we gradually begin to loosen those, but at some point, there's always a tipping point where the algorithms or the field combinations that you've used stop giving you that level of reliability. Now, you can still find some deeply hidden duplicate records that you want to clean up, but the overall results might be a little bit too messy to automate. Right? So we want to find that point where we gradually loosen the filters to give us flexibility, but not compromise on reliability. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about that as I go through the details of how I typically will set up the beginnings of an account. And then the last thing, our goal is to always find that set of filters that you can automate, that you can let run to get through that initial cleanup. As you can see here, this is just some test data. I've got 8,000 plus duplicates, 8,215 duplicates, but also that you can keep running in the background. Your data is dynamic, it's changing all the time. You're bringing in new data. Your team, your internal teams are working with that data. So you want to have a set of reliable filters that are running in the background automatically for you so that once you get through that initial lift and that initial cleanup, the system is working for you and staying ahead of it. Okay, so I'm going to jump ahead a little bit, and I apologize for this screen being sort of static. There's just not anything to show you when I talk about this next section. The next section I want to talk about is the fields that you want to use for your best practices filters, what we're calling the best practices filters. And those fields, as you think about the fields that you want to use, you want to, when you're in Salesforce and you're searching for records and you find a duplicate set, think about how do you know that those records are duplicates? What are you looking at in those records that tells you they're duplicates? And the answer to that question, those are the fields that you want to use in your filters. Now, by and large, for just about any organization I've worked with, on a lead or a contact, the best set of fields are the email address, the last name, the first name, and the company on the lead or the account name on the contact object. So again, email, last, first, phone, and account name. Those are the most unique fields that you can rely on to pull together records that have a high reliability. Again, you might have something unique in your data model, but across the board, those are the best ones. On the account object, it's a little more tricky. Certainly account name, but also phone number, various combinations of the address fields that can be billing address or shipping address, and then the website is also very good. So again, account name, phone, the address fields, and the website. Now what I've built out here is, excuse me, is the sort of core set of filters that I always use to get started. So I've got the lead tab here. So my lead filters and my contact filters are all the same. And then I have a set of account filters. And I'm going to drill into these in a moment when I show you the algorithms. But on the lead and contact side, I try to use email as much as I can. Email is always unique, and it's one of the best fields to identify duplicates, particularly if they're corporate emails. If you are in the nonprofit space or in the B2C space and people are using their personal emails, things get a little more complicated where you have Gmails and Hotmails and Outlook email addresses. But in the corporate space, the B2B space, email is always great. So the first one I always do is email plus last name and first name. Jump ahead to email and account name. And you can see this is pretty self-explanatory. Last name, first name, account name, last, first, and phone, and email, and last. Okay. Again, leads and contacts, the same. Okay. Those combinations, those 5 filters, those are always my go-tos. Those are what I recommend to clients when we're getting set up. And if we're doing this on a services project, these are always what I start with. Okay. Leads and contacts. On the account object, I always start with name and address. You can see I have 0 results here, and that's partly because I don't have those data fields in my filled out in my test data. So that's why you want to always have a set, a set of a sort of cluster or a combo of filters that you can rely on, because a lot of times you'll be missing certain data points that otherwise would be reliable data points. Name and phone number, and then name and website. So those are my 3 for accounts. Keep in mind, again, I'm going to go through how I set these filters up in just a moment. The last thing before I get into how I do the matching algorithms that I want to show you is the actual convert filters too. Don't forget that in addition to deduping filters, we also have convert filters. So a convert filter looks to see where you have lead records that might match existing contact records, or lead records that might match existing account records. So similarly, same kinds of combinations. I'm using email, last name, and first name on a lead to contact, or email and last name, or email and then the company account. And then on the lead to account, I use the company and account field. So company is the field on the lead, and the account name is the field on the account object. And the other one I use for lead to account is the email address combined to the website address, but I only look at the domain portion. And that's where we get into the sort of matching algorithms. Okay. All right, just a quick check-in. If you're following me, again, these are just filters, the recommended set of filters. We're going to send this out in a document. These are my go-tos. If you have any questions, or you're following along or you're not following along, just ping Olivia and let us know. I'm going to jump ahead a little bit and talk to you about how I set these filters up. And go to contact. All right, and we are going to drill into, I think we'll start with this one. So as I said, I always recommend right out of the box, you start with those exact matches. Set exact on all of those fields. That is your highest reliability. Exact match is always a one-to-one correspondence between the values in the field. But as you know, Cloudingo has a whole set of different matching algorithms. And you can set these different algorithms so that you add some flexibility into your data set. So I wanted to go through my recommended set of fields and tell you how I typically add the second layer of flexibility into my data, into my filter configuration. And then those are the ones that I typically have running continuously in the background, ongoing. So let's just go down the list. On the email address, I always set that to exact, but I set it to ignore case. So ignore case just means it doesn't matter if the value in your Salesforce field is in uppercase letters or lowercase letters. As long as you tell Cloudingo to ignore the case differences, it's going to pull those together. Okay. On the last name field, typically I will always set that to an exact match. If you need a little more flexibility in the last name field, I would choose first n characters. And as you choose first n characters, you can set that number. Now this one I would be a little bit cautious with and check your results, because last names sometimes are short, sometimes they're long. If you have picked too many characters or too few characters, you can get some mixed results there. So I would either choose first n or exact. Now first name is an interesting one, and this is something that I like to show to our clients because they aren't always aware of a proprietary algorithm that Cloudingo has developed for the first name field. I always choose exact, but you can see these options over here where I've told it not only to ignore case, but I've also asked it to enable synonym matching. And synonym matching allows you to pull together short version or informal versions of people's names and formal versions of people's names. And I like to use my own name as an example. So my name is Stephen, and I spell Stephen S-T-E-P-H-E-N. But Stephen is often spelled S-T-E-V-E-N. And most of the time, people just call me Steve. They don't call me Stephen. And I will admit that my family still calls me Stevie. So it is possible that I could exist in any data set with 4 different variations of my first name. But with synonym matching, Cloudingo will pull those things together. And it's a very powerful algorithm that gives you flexibility, but also reliability. And for those of you who may not be aware, the lexicon for those synonyms is actually editable. So if you need to take out some matches or you want to add some because you have a use case that's very customized, you can redefine those synonym matches. Okay.
Hey,
On the
Steve.
account name, Cloudingo, I'm sorry, Libby, did you have something?
Yes, a quick question. Would you recommend choosing ignore case for the last name field?
Yes, I typically always choose ignore case. I think ignore case is a very useful option. When you're first starting out, you might leave ignore case off. I like those exact matches on all fields with none of the flexibility built in when you're first learning Cloudingo for two reasons. One, maximum reliability of the results, but also it develops a level of comfort and confidence in what Cloudingo is doing and how it's doing it. But once you get over that hump, I ignore case for almost every single field. Yeah, highly recommend that.
Perfect. One more question. Would Robert and Bob or William and Bob be matched on synonym matching?
William and Bob would not be matched on synonym matching unless you were to customize your lexicon in Cloudingo. And that's just up in the settings in the upper
Oh, William
corner.
and Bill, apologies.
William and Bill would be, yes. William and Bill is in, so the synonym cluster for William is William, Will, Bill. Willie might be in there with an IE or a Y. Not 100% sure, but we could check that. It's easy to look in that lexicon and just find the Williams, and it'll show you what's in the sort of cluster of matches.
Perfect. Okay, one more question. What's the
Yeah.
best way to figure out people who've changed last names but are duplicates? Any suggestions?
So that is a great question, and that's where we get into some of the challenges. Okay, so, and this often happens through marriages or divorces, things like that, where last names are changing. For sort of a general ongoing filter, I probably would not eliminate the last name field. But for sort of one-offs that you're monitoring or you're just doing some work in the data set and you want to run a filter, I would remove the last name field. So you just take this last name field out. And I would use first name, and I would try to use email address. Email address is usually pretty reliable, an account or company, and I would just check what those results are. And if they're good, go ahead and merge them, or if you need to review the results. I might also try some different variations of that. So if the last name is changing, sometimes the email address is going to change too. So then you want to go to first name and maybe account or the phone number if you have it. And again, just try that filter out and see what happens. One of the things I'm going to get to at the end is just some general recommendations. One of those things is that, remember, in Cloudingo, you can experiment with no risk. A filter is just a report on your data. It's just a way of looking at your data. So build out these reliable filters and keep them running. Then feel free to play around with other filters and you can build filters all day long. Try the different algorithms, try different field combinations, just see what the results are. You're going to know pretty quickly by looking in that merge grid whether or not you've got reliable, accurate, true positive matches, or it's just a mess and that was not a good match for you. So I always encourage just playing around with the filters. There's no harm, there's no risk to your data in playing with the filters.
Perfect. We have one more question and then we can move on after that. And if we don't get to your question during the session, we will be sure to follow up directly. But last question for this section. Can you speak to the difference between using fuzzy match for first name and exact match with synonyms?
Yes, I can. We're jumping ahead a little bit, but I'm going to answer this question because everybody asks it.
Okay.
Fuzzy, the one that's actually called fuzzy, this one, that is based on SoundX. And SoundX is we'll just call it a matching algorithm for lack of a better way of describing it. It's a technology that estimates how something is pronounced in standard American English. Okay. So, and that's where fuzzy is actually really fuzzy. Fuzzy is my least favorite algorithm. And I say that with having co-founded this company and having 15 years of experience in working with this. I hate fuzzy. I do not like it. I don't find it particularly useful or reliable. I encourage you to experiment with it. But let me give you a good example. Chris and Christopher do not sound the same, and fuzzy would not put them together. But as human beings with minds that have intelligence, we can see those two things are together. I personally find on the first name field exact and synonym matching to be far more reliable, far more useful, and far more accurate. And there's another couple of reasons for that. Usually, when people enter their names into fields in a form that you're registering that filters through to Salesforce or whatever, an import file that you get from a trade show, whatever it might be, their names are usually pretty accurate. Now, they may be used variation. I might put Steve on one and Steven on another, but I usually am entering it pretty accurately. So personally, I think exact with synonym matching is a better option than fuzzy. Again, I encourage you to use fuzzy. I would be very cautious about automating anything that uses fuzzy though. Okay. Hope that answered your question. Am I good to go on, Olivia?
Yes.
Okay, wanted to just touch on a couple other algorithms that we have. On the account name, on the contact and the account object, and on the lead object, it's called company. We have a special algorithm called company name cleaned. And that algorithm is a proprietary algorithm that Cloudingo developed, and it's an amazing algorithm for accounts and companies. If you think about it, accounts and companies very often get input into Salesforce in inconsistent ways. So you might have Acme, you might have Acme Co, you might have the Acme Company, you might have Acme Incorporated, and so on. Company name cleaned will strip off those standard prefixes and suffixes so that all of those variations that I just mentioned will get pulled together as matches, because it's just looking at that core bit, the bit that says Acme or whatever the bits are. And the company name cleaned list is also something that is editable in the same way that the synonym lexicon is. So if you need to add some variations, because for example, you might work in the education space and you need to remove the word university or something like that, you can add that to the lexicon, or you can take off examples that are not fine-tuned enough. But company name cleaned is what I recommend for account fields and company fields to give you a little bit of flexibility without compromising on reliability. Okay, just a couple others that I'm going to show you. On the phone number, let's see if I can find phone number real quick. There it is. Oops, sorry. Oh, that's fine. Phone number, I usually recommend you use numeric only. In Salesforce, for North American numbers, the phone fields all have a validation rule, and it formats typically formats the phone numbers to have parentheses around the area code, then a space, and then a hyphen between the lead section of the phone number and the end of the phone number. But through imports, you can import phone numbers as a full string. Sometimes those phone numbers might be formatted with all dashes or periods. Sometimes there might be the +1, all those different things that happen with phone numbers despite Salesforce's validation rule. Using numeric only on a phone number eliminates any of that punctuation, and it's a much cleaner match, again, without sacrificing reliability. Just two more that I'm going to give you. On a website field, let's see if I can find website in here real quick. Oh, this is a contact. There's no website on contact. On website, we actually have an option to match the domain. I always recommend you use a domain match on website, because I've seen in data sets all the time where people sometimes will just paste in a whole URL that has all of the stuff after the slashes at the end of the website. And that's not going to find a match for you. And the nice thing about using a domain match is that you can also match the email field on a lead, for example, to the website field on the account. So that if the account name is different or if the account name is missing, you can use that domain to match that lead to the account that it goes to. And the last one I'm going to tell you, and this is where we're going to get back into fuzzy. Whoever asked the fuzzy question. Let me see if I can find a street field in here. All right, so street. In Cloudingo, we also have another proprietary algorithm that is specific to street fields. Okay? And to apply it, you actually have to select fuzzy. And I have to give huge apologies because I understand that this is very confusing. So fuzzy in general, for any text field, typically uses soundx. Fuzzy, when applied to a street field, actually works a lot more like a synonym match. And by that I mean, if you think about a street address, you might have 123 North Maple Street. But 123 North Maple Street could be 123 N Maple ST. It could be 123 North NORTH Maple STREET, and so on. So by applying this fuzzy match to a street, you're going to eliminate those variations, those standardized variations, and you can pull together addresses that might have been inconsistently entered in your data set. So again, don't get that confused. Fuzzy in general uses the soundx technology. Fuzzy, when applied to a street address, is actually a lot more like synonym matching. Okay. Any questions that you're following, tracking with me before I just jump into the last few recommendations that I have?
I think we're good.
Good. Okay. Last thing, we'll just go back to the dashboard so you can see the filters that I built. There we go. So first thing, as I said, these are general best practice filters. We put this session together because we get this question asked all the time, not only from new users, but users who have been customers of Cloudingo for years. So right out of the box, these are going to be highly reliable filters. They're going to help you stay ahead of your data quality and keep it clean. And they're things that you can safely, comfortably let run in the background on a daily basis so that you don't have to monitor. And then when your schedules allow, you can log into the application and play around with some of those filters and see what other deep-seated stuff you can find. Which leads me to my first recommendation, and I've already made it, is that feel free to experiment. Don't be afraid to build new filters. There's no limit on the number of filters you can create. There's no limit on the number of field combinations you can build into a filter. There's no limit on how often you can change those algorithms, and just see what Cloudingo returns for you. Right? You're going to find some really interesting things. The only thing I would caution you is to make sure you don't schedule any of those filters until you've actually looked at the results, okay? The next thing I recommend, this set of best practices filters are things that I always start with every single customer. Your data and your data model is unique to your operational needs. So spend a few minutes just reflecting on that and thinking, okay, yeah, Steve told me to use email, last name, and first name, but is there something else on the lead or the contact object that is relevant and key within your individual data set that tells you when something is or is not a duplicate that would be subject to merge? And you can add that in. Right? Those are things that I can't account for in a general session like this because I don't know the uniqueness and the specificity of your individual data sets. But just think about your own data model and adapt these filters to those needs. The next thing I always recommend for any filter, even the most reliable filter, is you spend a little bit of time reviewing the results. Okay? So if you're familiar with Cloudingo, and you're all customers, so you should at least have some familiarity with you. What I've done is drilled into the results of a filter, and we're going to load the merge grid. So this is the merge grid. Over here on the right in the white columns, those are all of the individual records in Salesforce. Okay? They matched on the email address, the last name, and the first name. And Cloudingo returned these to me. And there's a hyperlink. We can click through and open that record directly in Salesforce and take a look at it. But what you're looking at over here is when you're checking your results, first thing you want to do is look at the white columns. Say, okay, are these real duplicates? Is this what my business considers to be a duplicate? And if the answer is yes, you can proceed. If the answer is no, then you need to modify your filter. The next thing I'll point out is the merge preview. This is the blue column. The merge preview shows you what your end result is going to be if you click this merge button or if you automate the filter and you merge these records. Now, the beautiful thing about the merge preview is that this is actually applying the automation rule, the merge rule. Now, we didn't talk about merge rules, but you should be familiar that the merge rule defines how those records are going to get merged. That's where you can go through and pick various fields from all the different records so that you can build out the best final record. So we could choose various fields from all of these different records, and we built this best final record. This merge preview is applying that rule, and it's your way of verifying the rule is set correctly. So before you automate anything, I always recommend that you do spot checking. And I like to do spot checking at least 10 groups. Just click through your groups, and they'll load in the merge grid, and you can take a look at them. And I apologize for the delay. It's the GoToWebinar overlay is delaying the UI responsiveness. But again, review before merging. And then the last thing is just build these filters out, get them running, check your results, and analyze what Cloudingo is doing for you, and then continue moving forward. Set schedules on those filters, let them run in the background for you. You can just schedule them to calculate daily and auto merge, and then build on your knowledge and your experience with Cloudingo to find, again, those more deep-seated records. Use real-time merge so that it's running as records are updating in Salesforce or coming new into Salesforce. Schedule, use flexible matching algorithms, and just check those results and get your data to as high a quality as it can be. Okay, so that's the extent of my presentation. What I want to do, and I know we're probably getting to the end, and we're usually these sessions are about 30 minutes, sometimes they're 45, and I know it's lunchtime and you're probably getting ready to go to lunch. If anybody has a best practice that they'd like to share, I would love for you to share that. You can either do that through the chat window, or if you want, we can unmute you. I'm not expecting anybody to, but if you have something you want to share, please do. The other thing is if there's any other questions you might have or recommendations that you want to throw our way before we sign off of this session, please do that quickly, and we'll just give a minute or two to think about that. And then lastly, as a reminder, we will send this video. You will have access to the beautifully formatted document that Olivia made for us. And any follow-up questions that we haven't gotten to, we will contact you offline to answer. All right. Yeah, so just a minute, think about it, and then I'm going to ask Olivia what the questions are.
We're getting some questions, so.
We will stay on and answer as many as we can, as long as we can. So if anybody needs to go, don't feel bad. No hard feelings. Sorry I didn't get to see you, but I'm thrilled that you joined us today. Thank you. And then I'm going to turn it over and let Olivia ask me the question.
Perfect. Okay, so can the filter for contact to match if account is the same or sounds the same? The filter?
Yes. So the question is, if you're looking for duplicates with contacts, and presumably that question meant you're matching on some of the other fields like first name or last name, but you also want to include the account in there. So there's two ways to use the account field on a contact merge. One is the account ID. So in Salesforce, every record has a unique ID. When you use account ID, you are only going to be looking for matching contacts that are in the exact same account record. And that can be important and relevant in a lot of use cases. Outside of ID, then you use the account name field, and that's where you can use any of those algorithms. So you can use the company clean one, the one I recommended, but you can also use fuzzy, which is the SoundX model. So I think that was the question, can we use like the sounds like option for the account name? And the answer is yes. So you still want to match on some other fields, probably email address, maybe last name, first name, but on the account name, you just set that one to a fuzzy match, and that will give you the sounds like.
Perfect. Okay, another question is, what is the recommendation best practice for merging contacts if they are truly duplicates but also exist on separate account records? Worried about having orphan accounts, is there a good way to merge accounts and contacts at the same time?
So multi-level answer to this one, so try to follow with me. Okay, there's a couple of things. If you want to merge contacts that are on separate accounts, the relationship between the master contact and its account will be the one that's preserved. So the contact on the secondary account is going to be removed from that account. That might give you an orphan account, or there might be other contacts on that account. It depends on your business model. So that's the first thing. So in a general merge, that primary account on the contact for the master contact is the one that will be preserved. The child contacts will be deleted off of the secondary account. Next level to that, if in your data set, if in your Salesforce instance, you have enabled multi-account contact relationships. Okay? It's a great feature of Salesforce. And I think it's enabled by default. I'm not sure on new instances, but historical instances it's not. You have to enable it. With multi-account contact relationships, there's always a primary relationship and a secondary relationship. And when you merge contacts that are on different accounts, Cloudingo is able to preserve that secondary relationship. It'll move the primary from the child contact, the primary account from the child contact, and make it a secondary account on the master contact. And Cloudingo is actually the only dedupe merging application that can support that model in Salesforce. In Salesforce, if you try to merge, it'll tell you to remove the redundant relationship before it'll actually let you merge the records. Okay. Now, in that model, you still have that secondary account living out there in your data set. So again, it could be an orphaned account. In a B2B model, that's not relevant, but that's where we get into the third level. And this applies mostly to nonprofits and B2C data models. In the nonprofit model, if you merge contacts and there is an account, and in that model, the account is actually called a household that has no contacts on it, that account gets transformed into an anonymous account, which is a problem for your data. And it's a problem for your data quality. In a B2C model, that wouldn't happen unless you're using the nonprofit overlay, but you would still have this account that has no contacts on it. Cloudingo does have a feature. We call it hybrid merge or related object merge. And with hybrid merge, and this is a feature that actually has to be enabled. So if this is a feature that you think is useful to you, let us know, and we will have somebody contact you to talk about how that feature can get enabled. We don't enable it by default because it could be a problem if you don't really understand what's happening. But the hybrid merge focuses on the contact object. You're bringing together duplicate contacts and you're merging them. And immediately after those contacts get merged, the accounts, the specific accounts related to those contacts also get merged. And that prevents you from having an orphaned account, or in the nonprofit model, the account that gets transformed to anonymous and then you can't find it. Okay? So again, that's the hybrid merge. So 3 different options for how we handle the account when you're doing your contact merge. And let me know, either offline or something if that confused you. I know there was a lot of detail in that answer, so I apologize if you didn't quite follow.
Yeah, someone pinged. There's also an option to merge related direct accounts before merging contacts, right?
Yes, again, that's a setting in Cloudingo that needs to be enabled on our side before you have access to it. So if that's so again, that's hybrid merge. You're merging the contacts and the accounts at the same time, and you also have an option for the order in which those two things get merged. We could do the accounts first and then the contacts. The usual way is the contacts first and then the accounts, but it depends upon your use cases and your operational needs. But those are features and functions that are baked into the Cloudingo application.
Okay, another question we got is for org business accounts, is there a way to override the error message to allow deduplication? For example, we have a church with duplicate records, but one of the fields contains a value not on the pick list, which prevents Cloudingo from deduplicating the record. What are your thoughts on addressing this issue without requiring manual intervention directly in Salesforce?
Yes, so there's a couple things. You actually wouldn't be able to merge those records in Salesforce either, because there's so the issue is that they're getting an error message that says you have a inactive pick list value. So the problem is in the merge, Cloudingo is either trying to update, is probably trying to update a pick list field with a value that is no longer acceptable for that pick list. So there's a couple things I would do to address this. In the short term, if you just need a quick fix, you could disable the validation on that pick list just temporarily and push the merges through. So that just means that it's not restricted anymore. Take that restriction off and then re-enable it after you do the merge. A better longer term solution is to actually use Cloudingo's update features. So, there's mass update right over here. And you just go and find all of your records that have that expired value in the pick list. So you build a filter that says, contacts, pick list, value equals whatever the retired value is, and it'll return a report of those records. And you just figure out what the current value is, what the update should be. And you just update them all real quickly. And that is a better, longer term way of managing your data, because then you don't get those blocks from Salesforce saying you can't merge this because the value is unacceptable. Okay. That's actually a very common error, and it happens a lot with historical data because it's using values from pick lists that have been changed and updated over time that better align with your operational needs. So the longer term better solution is to do a mass update and quickly update those to whatever the current value should be. The short term would be to just disable the restriction and push the records through and then re-enable it.
Cool. Okay, another question is, if 10 people are using a generic email address, example, admin@training.com, but the filter is useful for everything else, is there a way to ignore this one match so we can automate the merge without merging this instance?
Yes. So what you want to do is set some scope settings. Well, there's a couple things. To accommodate generic email addresses, admin@, contact@, info@, those kinds of things. And that's a very ordinary kind of thing for email addresses. I always try to use one of the name values. So first name, last name, because those should be unique, even if the email address is not unique. The next step down is to use a scope setting on your filter. And the scope setting would be something like, email address does not equal or does not contain something like admin@ or contact@. And it's a little bit cumbersome because you do need to think about the different variations, and you probably won't get them all, but you can come close. And so that you can exclude those generic email addresses. And I also do sometimes recommend you do the same thing with things like Gmails and Hotmails and outlooks. So that the filter has reliable results that you can automate, and then you can just find, you can take that setting off for a more manually oriented filter that you're checking to see if any of those actually should be merged. So hopefully that answered your question. It's just on the filter setup, there's scope settings. And scope settings just define subsets of data. So here, when on this first section here, section 2, that's looking at all of the records, but sections 3 and 4 allow you to then limit that. So you could exclude records that have an email address that begins with admin at or contact at. Right. Anything else, Olivia?
We're having some interest on hybrid merge, but we'll follow up directly on that. And
oh yeah, hybrid merge is an amazing feature. It does not apply to all data models, though. That's the only thing I'll say.
Perfect. That should be it. And if anyone else has any more questions, feel free to ping us. Otherwise, we'll wrap things up.
Yep, and we're going to follow up with the recording and the document. The last thing I want to say is, hey, thanks for being here today for these users group sessions. I am pleasantly surprised at the response that we've gotten. We're going to try to find a platform that allows us to be more interactive and where I can see you and you can actually talk. That's my ideal scenario, but we'll see how it goes. So thank you for being here. Thank you for being a Cloudingo customer. Remember, we are here to help you in this process. These best practices are things that I start with, but we're happy to talk through your specific use cases and the specific uniqueness of your data models. So don't hesitate to reach out to us. That's what we're here for. I hope you have a great rest of the day. I hope winter hasn't been too terrible for you. We're here in Texas and it was 80 degrees the other day and sunshiny. So, you know, hope I'm not making you jealous. Take care. Thanks again. We'll talk to you on the next one.
Thanks, everyone.